The Britain's Got Talent studio carried its familiar Saturday afternoon energy as Simon Cowell settled into his judge's chair for what he anticipated would be another routine day of auditions. It was a gray March afternoon in 2024, and the iconic red curtains framed the stage where countless dreams had been both realized and shattered over the years. Simon adjusted his signature black t-shirt and took a sip of his tea, mentally preparing himself for the parade of hopeful performers that awaited. At 64 years old, Simon had built his entire identity around being the entertainment industry's most intimidating figure. His explosive temper, cutting remarks, and ability to reduce grown adults to tears had become his trademark. What audiences didn't see was the profound loneliness that fueled his anger. Decades of prioritizing career success over genuine relationships had left him isolated, surrounded by people who feared him rather than loved him, and increasingly bitter about his emotional isolation. 3-year-old Oliver Martinez from Birmingham was not scheduled to perform. He had come to watch the taping with his grandmother, Rosa Martinez, who was a longtime fan of the show. Oliver was an unusually empathetic child with dark hair and large brown eyes that seemed to see straight into people's hearts. Despite his young age, he had an intuitive understanding of human emotions that often surprised adults, particularly his ability to sense when someone's anger was masking deeper pain. What made Oliver's presence particularly significant was his recent experience with his own father, who had struggled with anger management issues stemming from loneliness and depression following a difficult divorce. Oliver had learned to recognize that when adults were very angry all the time, it usually meant they were sad or hurt about something else, and that the anger was a way of keeping people away so they couldn't hurt them more. The audition process was running when a young dancer took the stage for what should have been an encouraging performance. The 16-year-old girl was clearly nervous, and when she stumbled slightly during her routine, Simon's reaction was swift and brutal. "Stop, stop, stop," Simon barked, his voice echoing through the studio with such venom that the girl froze mid-movement. "This is absolutely dreadful. You're wasting everyone's time with this pathetic excuse for dancing. Did you actually think this was good enough for this stage?" The teenager's face crumpled as Simon's words hit her like physical blows. Tears began streaming down her cheeks as she stood frozen in humiliation, unable to speak or move. "You're clearly not ready for anything resembling professional performance," Simon continued relentlessly. "This is embarrassing to watch, and frankly, whoever told you that you had talent did you no favors." The studio fell into uncomfortable silence as everyone watched the young performer's complete emotional breakdown under Simon's assault, but it was Oliver's reaction that would change everything. The 3-year-old had been watching Simon's face throughout the tirade, and what he saw there wasn't cruelty, it was pain masked as anger. Oliver slipped away from his grandmother's side and walked toward the judge's panel, with the fearless determination that only very young children possess. The production crew, focused on the drama unfolding on stage, didn't notice the tiny figure approaching Simon's chair. As Simon prepared to deliver another cutting remark to the sobbing teenager, he felt a small hand tug at his sleeve. Looking down, he saw Oliver standing beside his chair, looking up at him with those large, knowing brown eyes. "What are you doing here?" Simon snapped, his irritation at being interrupted adding to his already explosive mood. "You shouldn't be." Oliver looked directly into Simon's face and whispered with the devastating clarity that only small children possess, "Are you angry because nobody loves you?" The words hit Simon like a psychological earthquake. The studio fell into complete silence as this 3-year-old essentially diagnosed the emotional root of Simon's legendary cruelty. The question was so accurate, so precisely aimed at his deepest wound, that Simon felt as though his soul had been exposed by someone too young to understand the devastation they had just caused. Simon's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fury, and then something that looked like terror as he processed being psychologically dissected by a toddler. His hands began to tremble as the full impact of Oliver's observations settled over him. "What did you say?" Simon asked, his voice barely above a whisper, though he had heard Oliver perfectly clearly. Oliver, with the innocent persistence of childhood, repeated his question. "I asked if you're angry because nobody loves you. Because when my daddy gets really mad and yells at people, it's usually because he's sad about being lonely." Simon felt something cold and horrible settle in his stomach, as this 3-year-old compared him to a father whose anger stemmed from loneliness and emotional isolation. The parallel was so accurate it was unbearable. "Your daddy?" Simon managed to ask, his voice shaking. Oliver nodded with the matter-of-fact tone of someone sharing familiar family dynamics. "Daddy gets really, really angry when he misses mommy, or when he feels like nobody wants to spend time with him." Grandma says that sometimes people are mean to others because they're hurting inside and don't know how to ask for hugs. Simon felt his composure beginning to crumble as this child essentially suggested that his legendary temper was a manifestation of emotional neediness and a desperate desire for connection that he didn't know how to express healthily. The entire studio watched in stunned amazement as Britain's most feared judge seemed to be having an emotional breakdown in response to a 3-year-old's innocent psychological assessment. "Oliver," Simon said, his voice breaking, "what makes you think I need hugs?" Oliver's answer revealed his intuitive understanding of human emotional needs, because when people yell really loud and say mean things, it usually means they want attention and love, but they don't know how to ask for it nicely. "And your face looks sad even when you're being angry." Simon felt tears beginning to form as this 3-year-old identified the profound sadness that he had been hiding behind decades of aggressive behavior. The idea that his anger was a maladaptive attempt to get attention and connection was devastating in its accuracy. "Oliver," Simon asked, barely able to speak, "do you think people would love me if I wasn't angry all the time?" Oliver considered this question with the seriousness of someone who understood the relationship between behavior and affection. "Maybe, but first you'd have to stop scaring them away with yelling. My daddy learned that people can't love you if they're too scared of you to get close." Simon felt something fundamental break inside him as this child essentially told him that his defensive anger had created the very isolation that fueled his rage in the first place. Without saying another word, Simon stood up from his chair and walked toward the stage exit. The audience gasped as they realized that their most iconic judge was actually leaving in the middle of an audition. The cameras followed him as he disappeared backstage, leaving Oliver standing beside the empty judge's chair, confused about why his honest observation had caused such a dramatic reaction. "Did I say something wrong?" Oliver called out in his small voice, looking around the stunned studio. Backstage, Simon was inconsolable. The production team found him in his dressing room, sobbing uncontrollably as he processed what had just happened. This wasn't just professional criticism. This was a 3-year-old child identifying the core emotional dysfunction that had shaped his entire adult life. "He's right," Simon said through his tears to anyone who would listen. "That little boy is absolutely right. I am angry because nobody loves me. I've spent my whole life pushing people away with cruelty because I was too afraid of being rejected to risk being vulnerable." When clips of the interaction became public weeks later, they sparked international conversations about the relationship between anger and loneliness, the emotional costs of success built on intimidation, and the profound insights that children can offer about adult emotional patterns. More importantly for Simon personally, the encounter with Oliver became a catalyst for seeking therapy and examining the relationship between his professional persona and his personal emotional needs. "Oliver didn't mean to destroy me," Simon would later say in interviews. "He just asked the question that I had been too afraid to ask myself. That 3-year-old forced me to confront the fact that my anger was really just loneliness in disguise." The conversation led Simon to begin working with therapists specializing in anger management and attachment issues, gradually learning to express his need for connection in healthier ways. 6 months later, Simon invited Oliver and his grandmother back to the show. Oliver was curious to see if Simon had learned to be less angry and more loved. "Are you still angry because nobody loves you?" Oliver asked with the same directness that had characterized their first meeting. Simon knelt down to Oliver's eye level, his expression softer than it had been in years. "I'm learning that people can love me when I'm not angry all the time, Oliver. You taught me that I was pushing away the very thing I wanted most." Oliver smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully helped solve a problem. "Good. Now maybe people can give you hugs instead of being scared of you." The story became a landmark moment in discussions about the emotional roots of aggressive behavior, the relationship between professional personas and personal needs, and the power of innocent observation in identifying psychological patterns that adults often miss or deny. But perhaps most importantly, the conversation demonstrated that sometimes the most profound insights about our emotional lives come from those too young to be intimidated by our defenses. In this case, a 3-year-old boy who understood that anger is often loneliness wearing a mask, and who had the courage to ask whether removing that mask might allow for the love that the angry person desperately needed. Oliver's question about whether Simon was angry because nobody loved him became a turning point in Simon's understanding of himself, forcing him to confront whether his legendary temper was protecting him from rejection or guaranteeing it.